In the middle of the 1970s, when guitar solos were already the pinnacle of a musician's skill, guitarists everywhere are obsessed with the explosive new sound Eddie Van Halen is introducing to rock music. Eddie's two-handed tapping method defied convention and expanded the instrument's potential with this unorthodox approach. With a level of technical brilliance that stunned both musicians and fans, Eddie swiftly established himself as a guitar icon. His playing wasn't just proficient, the guitarist of another era, whose eerie multi-layered soundscapes had made Led Zeppelin one of the greatest rock bands in history, was revered for his mystical compositions and daring improvisations, making him a pillar of classic rock and an almost untouchable icon. However, what most fans were unaware of was the complex undercurrent between Eddie and Jimmy Page, who was revolutionary in the kind of innovation that would inspire a new generation and forever change the landscape of rock guitar. The relationship between Van Halen and Page was characterized by admiration, creative influence, and a hint of rivalry over time. Years later, Page would disclose that the relationship defied easy definitions, evolving from mutual respect to something far more complex. Their journey together was as much about their differences as it was about what united them, each of them representing a different era in rock guitar, but bound by the shared ambition to push musical boundaries for Van Halen. Page had been an inspiration from the beginning, as Eddie, a young guitarist, was mesmerized by Page's ability to create unadulterated, powerful sounds using methods that were almost magical. Eddie was drawn to Page's one-handed riffs and fring style, which led him on a quest for knowledge that would ultimately result in his groundbreaking two-handed tapping technique. However, as Van Halen rose to fame, his confidence increased, and he didn't hesitate to criticize the very musicians who had influenced him in the 1980s. Eddie was shocked when he called Page's live performances sloppy and imprecise. Admirers and appeared to cloud their shared regard for one another. Picture this: Eddie Van Halen in his adolescent years, wide-eyed and determined, standing in the crowd at a Led Zeppelin concert at the Forum in Los Angeles. Van Halen's audacious remarks established him as a prodigy who was not afraid to challenge the established icons of rock, creating an unspoken tension between the two giants that would persist even as both continued to redefine their roles in the rock pantheon. Jimmy Page was deep in his iconic dragon and wild man outfit. It was a turning point for Eddie, who had always pushed boundaries but had never witnessed such mastery and abandon coupled in one performance. As he launched into one of his blazing solos, producing sounds that appeared to defy the limitations of a single guitar, Eddie found that Page's method was more than simply speed. It was the way he could raise his hand mid-rough, with only one, to produce complex echoing sounds that enthralled his audience. This was like an invitation to experiment and come up with new ideas, and he would return home that evening, feeling motivated and ready to improve on what he had observed, that he could transform it into something even wilder that would eventually become his hallmark sound. As Eddie developed his own style, he embraced tapping but added a twist. While Page would tap the fretboard with his free hand, Eddie pushed it further, making it sound almost orchestral by blending tapping with melodic phrasing. But Van Halen's admiration for Page was rooted in these moments, but was never blind adulation. However, as Van Halen's career took off and his confidence as a guitarist grew, Eddie's recollections of Page's live performances were less charitable. In a daring 1981 Guitar World interview, he shocked fans by claiming that P on stage was sloppy, playing as if he had a broken hand, and he's 2 years old. As his willingness to criticize his early influences grew, he openly respected Page's songwriting and studio work, referring to Led Zeppelin and Led Zeppelin a first class. Eddie's criticism amounted to a gauntlet. Jimmy Page, the tall figure who, with his thundering riffs and supernatural stage presence, had revolutionized rock, was now being criticized by Van Halen's rising star. Eddie's remarks implied a changing of the guard, a change in the qualities that the younger generation looked for in a guitarist. Fans questioned if the statements were a sincere criticism or a young prodigy's attempt to distance himself from a legend. By the time the 1980s hit, both, when Page's dark, cryptic artistry clashed with Eddie's explosive perfection. Both Jimmy Page and Eddie Van Halen were well-known figures who embodied different rock guitar eras and styles. Every song in the Zeppelin library was layered with tones and effects that sounded almost alchemical, generating deep soundscapes that carried listeners away. Page's collaboration with Led Zeppelin was praised for its depth and mystique. On songs like Kashmir and others, Page's riffs evoked ancient, sophisticated, and occasionally eerily gloomy melodies, much like a conductor would. Van Halen, a guitar genius who had burst onto the scene with a different set of priorities than Eddie, was the firecracker in the room. His performances, which were filled with high-speed tapping and dizzying solos, transformed rock into something fast, frenetic, and full of life. While Page reveled in mood and mystery, Eddie, on the other hand, focused on precision, volume, and excitement on stage. Stairway to Heaven set a standard in rock music that was as much about mood as it was about skill. As he performed solos that seemed to defy gravity, he flashed his signature smile. Fans would frequently perceive Eddie as a virtuoso, and Page as a craftsman, but this difference created an almost unspoken rivalry between them. Rock guitar was not about restraint or mystique, rather, it was about pushing the limits of what a guitar could achieve. Fans swiftly took sides after Eddie's scathing criticism of Page's live performances, accusing her of being careless and lacking precision. Went viral. Contesting the old guard, or was he actually dissatisfied with Page's less technical and more improvisational theatrical style? This small conflict turned into a philosophical argument. For fans, Jimmy Page and Eddie Van Halen symbolized the young blood of the genre, the speed and energy of rock's new era, and the old soul of rock steeped in the mystique of blues and experimental soundscapes. These two legends represented a changing definition of greatness in rock guitar. And years passed without Jimmy Page ever responding to Eddie Van Halen's stinging fans' assessment of his live performances. When Eddie passed away tragically in 2020, it signaled the end of an era for rock guitar, and Page, whose own legacy was partially entwined with Eddie's, finally broke his silence in a deeply reflective statement. Page paid tribute to Eddie's talent, calling him the real deal, a guitarist whose dazzling technique had transformed rock music forever. This silence seemed telling, as if Page had chosen to let the criticism hang in the air untouched. Page's remark struck a chord with supporters, who have long felt that Page's statement acknowledged the evolution of rock guitar, which Eddie Van Halen had elevated to new heights with his inventive techniques and signature sound. Page recognized the younger guitarist's boundary, pushing brilliance, and what it had done for the genre, noting how Eddie's fearless approach had inspired countless musicians in paying this tribute. However, Page's statement did more than just praise Eddie's accomplishments. The same desire to push limits that drove Eddie's journey with Led Zeppelin decades ago may be evident in his innovations for fans. Following Eddie's death, Page sent a message that was both bittersweet and respectful of the innovation. In his leaving words, Eddie expressed his admiration and tribute to the guitar world, bringing with him a final realization that the rock landscape they had shared had transformed forever, from an unspoken rivalry to one of reverence. Page's layered, almost mystical approach to music gave rock a sense of depth and atmosphere by fusing blues folk and psychedelic rock into compositions that felt like journeys through soundtracks, like Kashmir and No. It is the last chapter in a story of mutual influence, creative diversity, and ultimately respect between two rock giants. Jimmy Page and Eddie Van Halen's legacies echo through every corner of rock music, each leaving an indelible mark that extends beyond their own styles and into the very fabric of the genre. Quarter were immersive experiences, created with a careful hand and a visionary's ear, not just tunes. In addition to his technical prowess, Page's legacy was his ability to take listeners to other realms, with each note contributing to a larger fabric of narrative and emotion. Eddie Van Halen, on the other hand, revolutionized rock's contemporary electrified edge by transforming the electric guitar into a machine of sheer energy and speed. His inventive tapping style and frantic onstage presence transformed rock concerts into athletic achievements, infusing Van Halen's music with the unbridled joy and passion that made rock feel both dangerous and exhilarating. Where Page's legacy is steeped in the mystical and the timeless, he pushed the boundaries of what a guitarist could accomplish with each solo, a demonstration of daring and accuracy. Van Halen's opposing styles demonstrate the variety of possibilities within rock, demonstrating that greatness might arise from wildly disparate methods. They continue to be dynamic and explosive, leaving a legacy of sheer power and innovation. Van Halen's pursuit of technical mastery and his commitment to the nuances of sound both pushed the other and the genre in new directions. Page's respect for Eddie, following his death, only served to highlight their unique bond, where rivalry gave way to admiration. Their contributions are interwoven, each pushing boundaries that continue to inspire guitarists of all generations, demonstrating that there is no one way to greatness in rock, just as there is no one path to greatness in life.